Good morning and welcome back to the Broadcast Retirement Network. I'm Jeff Snyder, and this is BRN AM for Monday, September 23rd, 2019. Here are your top stories. Medical schools are now taking aim at student loan debt, and Millennials and Gen Z are remaking the workforce. Many medical students are now graduating with over $200,000 in student loan debt. That's certainly blunting enthusiasm to become a doctor. Joining me now to discuss what some medical schools may be doing to address this concern is Devin Banerjee. He's a senior financial services editor with LinkedIn. Good morning, Devin. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Well, I got to hand it to you because it's very early on the West Coast, and we certainly appreciate you getting up exceedingly early. And what can I say? It's amazing. So let's jump right in. At the top of my headlines, I mentioned that some medical schools are paying off student loan debt. This is rather groundbreaking. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Jeff, a big step taken last week in this area by the medical school at Cornell University. This is Weill Cornell. So they announced that they would be giving all students who qualify for aid a full ride to Weill Cornell. Typically a year at Weill Cornell is costing north of $90,000 a year in tuition, in room, and board, and books, and education materials. So currently about 52% actually of Weill Cornell students qualify for aid. So about that proportion going forward will receive this full ride. And a really interesting conversation started around this topic. People are saying, look, we get that medical students who graduate with debt are graduating with, on average, about $200,000 in debt. But doctors are also the profession most likely to earn and reach the 1% of Americans in earning and wealth. And what we're really seeing is that this is driven by donors, actually. So at Cornell, it's actually Sandy Weill, who, comes from the financial services space, former CEO and chairman of Citigroup. He and other donors at UCLA and NYU and Columbia actually are really the ones behind this push. And, they talk about a couple things. One of which is, in the medical profession, we're not seeing enough, diversity, for example. People from middle class and lower income backgrounds sometimes don't see a path for them in that profession because of the cost of education and the debt that comes with it. We're also seeing, you hear this conversation a lot about a coming shortage potentially of medical professionals, doctors specifically, in rural areas around the country. And that's actually largely driven by the lack of really high earning opportunities in rural areas for doctors to pay off their student debt. So a lot of these donors are seeing this as a way to alleviate some of those really structural, kind of hurdles in the medical system. And so, we'll see how this goes. We'll see how long it lasts. Of course, donors are not around at all times. The path being taken at Columbia is to set up an endowment using donations, and then to have an investment plan going forward and a spending plan out of the endowment. So I think we'll see some schools look to that model so that it's a bit more sustainable going forward.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about this because we've talked about this on and off this program on the podcast about paying off student loan debt. And I was actually inquisitive because I didn't know if they were going to use endowment money or if it was going to be direct donations. It sounds like in these instances of these two schools, competing approaches, very interesting. But very interesting because we've had some of the presidential candidates talk about forgiving student loan debt. And I guess I'm wondering if this approach could see movement from not just medical schools, but to regular college, regular schools, for lack of a better term?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. That's absolutely possible. I think because this approach is so driven by donors, and we're seeing, at least in these instances, donors really home in on medical colleges and medical school. So right now, that's the focus for them. And again, I mentioned some of those kind of structural, issues in the country about inequality, about a doctor shortage. And so I think that's really what they're going after. And there's some other knock-on effects that people in the medical profession are talking a lot about on LinkedIn when we featured this story, which is that we see many doctors who actually, when they're considering what kind of a doctor to be or whether to specialize, we're seeing a lot of them look basically for the highest earning paths in the medical profession and specialize. And so there's a shortage of general practitioners and family medicine. Pediatrics is an area where there's a coming shortage potentially. And so even they see some issues in their own profession, the way cost and student loans has been in place so far.
Everyone wants to be Dr. Pimple Popper, apparently.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's the path forward, right? Let's do social, have a reality TV show and right out of medical school. Maybe that should be something that they teach in medical schools.
I totally agree. And I was going to say, my sister and brother-in-law are doctors, and they went through, the very high cost educational path. And I was chatting with them about this, and they talk about these same things I just mentioned, how they and friends of theirs, basically have to look for arbitrage opportunities in their career to kind of specialize or to find higher paying jobs. And it really, I think, creates these vacuums in different parts of the profession where there are these shortages now.
Yeah, and let's not forget that there are other headwinds for many doctors. Obviously, the cost of insurance, very high, and then healthcare costs are exorbitant, and sometimes people don't even they don't have insurance, or they don't have coverage, and they don't want to go and see the practitioner, which is a huge mistake, especially when you're talking about your longevity and retirement. We can get into that. We probably need to have a doctor on the program in the next few weeks to talk about the importance of healthcare in retirement and pre-retirement. But yeah, I mean, doctors obviously serve a very important role. General practitioners, completely. And I know when we last talked, you had talked about we talked to Daniel Klein from the Motley Fool. There are technology firms that are getting into the medical profession as well.
Absolutely. We're seeing a war for talent in that regard. Some tech companies, Google, Apple, others who are creating health business lines and products are being able to snatch away doctors with better work-life balance, better pay, et cetera. And I was going to say another tangential conversation that's happening on the LinkedIn platform is among nurses. And nurses are saying, what about us? Our education is also quite costly. We also don't make enough. Our jobs are quite demanding. My colleague Jamie Lee at LinkedIn did a great story a couple of months ago about nurses who are commuting up to 3 hours each way to reach their jobs every day because they can't afford to live close to their jobs. And so I think we're going to see a big, as you mentioned at the top of the segment, ripple effect of other types of students and other professions saying, what about, debt alleviation for people on this path?
Yeah, I was going to say, what about me, right? I mean, that's what people are going to say. But I think it's definitely a path forward, and nice to see private colleges and public universities working towards helping students pay off their debt. Hey, Devin, would you mind sticking around? I want to go to a commercial break, but I know there's another item that you're tracking, and I'd love to be able to talk to you about it.
Let's do it. Doubleheader. I'm here for it.
Awesome. And when we come back, Devin's going to stick around. We're going to shift gears, and we're going to talk about how Millennials and Gen Z are now remaking the American workplace right here on BRN AM. Imagine a new television network that will make you richer, healthier, and in control of your financial future. This network is for the policewoman in Nashville, Tennessee, the baker in Dubuque, Iowa, the teacher in Lexington, Kentucky. We want to make the idea of savings and retirement culturally relevant. But what do you see as a defining issue of the midterms? especially for the smaller businesses. I mean, they are the lifeblood of the American economy. Featuring exclusive interviews, current affairs, and docuseries. 33 years old, you retired early.
The philosophy is money only matters if it helps you live a life that you love.
But you got to start thinking about retirement as soon as you get in.
The Broadcast Retirement Network will drive very high engagement with premium partnerships. So this isn't retirement and savings for your parents or grandparents. This is for all Americans. And we're going to change the way you think about money. Welcome to the next frontier of retirement and savings. This is BRN, the Broadcast Retirement Network. Welcome back. Well, millennials number close to 70 million, and they make up the largest percentage of the U.S. workforce. How are they and Gen Z remaking the workplace? Well, Devin Banerjee's still sticking around, and we're going to talk about this. Devin, thanks so much for staying around. I know it's early in San Francisco.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the other items that I mentioned at the top of the headlines is that millennials and Gen Z are remaking the workplace. And so our show is not just about boring retirement. Our show is really a lifestyle show, and we're looking at all facets of life. Devin, this is really interesting. What are you tracking on the platform about this particular topic?
Yeah, absolutely. And as you know about our platform, LinkedIn, it's people talking about the nature of work and how that's changing over time. And we've been seeing this conversation just light up the platform for, I'm going to be candid, the past several years now, on and off. And it's really about how young workers are really being able to shape their own work environment and culture really for the first time in a few generations. And so this conversation we featured recently was anchored around a survey by PwC, which found that the perception of what work is for people is really changing here in America. Work used to be a place where people went, mom and dad, or, in the old days, just dad is going to work today, taking his briefcase, and he's coming back at night. Now young people really see work as just another thing in their life, not a place to be or go at any given time. And now a lot of this is fueled by technology, of course, the rise of remote working, of email on your phone and other instant communication on your phone is really allowing for some of this work-life flexibility. And of course, there's another edge to that sword, which is the always-on culture now of being responsive, being expected to be responsive. So a lot of people are talking about that. But Jeff, you and I have talked about how employers and companies and managers really have to pay attention to this, because in a tight labor market, or just generally if you're trying to attract younger workers, there are some demands that they're making, either explicitly or implicitly. That's work-life balance, that's a more explicit expression of values and what's important to companies and their leadership teams. It's benefits, it's culture. It's actually, at least among some of my friends, it's stuff like retirement benefits. We see some people asking their employers, my friend is getting actually a 50% match up to the federal limit of 19,000 this year, as LinkedIn does, which is a really great policy. And they're saying, my friend's getting that policy, but you're giving me 50% up to 15,000, or you're not even giving me 50, or maybe you're giving me 6% or something. And so, a lot of people are paying attention to more specific benefits and policies and putting pressure on their employers. And, as this New York Times story that we featured this week says, they're reshaping the workforce. And it's kind of, there used to be this trope or this idea of millennials, which are they're lazy and they live in their parents' basements and stuff like this. But we hear less and less of that. We see fewer people kind of applying that label to young workers. And we're seeing a lot more conversation about how actually the nature of work in America has changed so much in the past 5 to 10 years. And a lot can be attributed to what young people want or implicitly demand when they're seeking employment.
Devin, let me ask you a question. I mean, it sounds very interesting, and I don't think anyone is lazy. People pursue their own self-interest, and I think that this is the case here. But does it create, and I don't know I did not read the article, my bad, but are these larger companies, smaller companies, technology companies, a particular sector, and also if there's an existing culture, and say there are different age ranges, it's not just all millennial or all Gen Z, do you get almost like a culture conflict that exists, and how do you manage that?
That's a fantastic question. And yes, we see a lot of managers joining the conversation when we feature these stories and saying, I don't just employ millennials on my team. I have people of all ages, of all backgrounds. This is a company. In some cases, people are saying, I work for a company that's been around for 100 years, 150 years. It has a culture, and the culture isn't changing like we describe it. That's totally true. To be candid, a lot of these changes are happening in technology and on the coasts or in Silicon Valley here, where I am specifically. But I think we are seeing, especially right now, because of the nature of the labor market, we're seeing employers starting to bend a bit more, even in traditional sectors. And so some of the largest companies here in America, if you think about the Procter and Gamble's of the world, and those types of companies, you see their policies changing, and that's because they need to attract that talent. Some of the stories, that I and my team in particular focus on as the finance editor, is how even traditional industries like finance are having to change their culture, and because they're in this talent war for young, smart people who could choose, to go work in strategy in a big tech company or pursue a finance career. And that talent war is really forcing even such an entrenched culture. If you think about the culture of finance, kind of how storied and entrenched that culture is, even the biggest companies there are changing. The biggest banks, the biggest asset managers are creating flexible working schedules, no more Saturday and Sunday work, or at least they're encouraging people not to do it. Things like dress codes are changing, things that seem simple, but really are what young people are asking for these days.
Yeah, and I don't think it's, by the way, I don't think it's just affecting young people. I think it's people in my age range. And also, we talked to Carrie Hannon last week from the New York Times, and she's has just written a book about being an entrepreneur in retirement. I think that people of all age ranges are adapting, and I think we're going to continue to see this because people want to work and continue working in retirement. Devin, we're going to have to leave it there. Very interesting. Thanks so much again for getting up early and joining us on the show. We'll talk to you again next week for another Social Media Monday, my friend.
Sounds good, Jeff. Take care.
Well, folks, that wraps up this episode of BRN AM. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you found it interesting. Hey, have a financial topic or someone of interest you think that we should interview? Well, drop us a line. And don't forget, for all the latest news and headlines, you can check out today's edition of The Morning Pulse. So until tomorrow, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the change.
Waiting here for you to take and drink of. But if you're tired of the same